Okay, good morning, everybody. It's 8:45, and welcome to the webinar this morning on future of the workplace. My name's Alan White. I'm delighted to have so many people joining the webinar this morning. We've got an interesting business climate, to say the least. There's all sorts of changes that business have been facing. So this webinar is going to include addressing those changes, those challenges that business have faced over the past 6 to 8 months, which has driven owners to rethink their office space. Working from home has proven successful for many businesses, so we're entering a new phase of flexible working. What does that mean? This event will hear from panelists around what the future for the workplace should look like. And I'm going to ask each panelist now to introduce themselves and just tell us what they do, and then we'll go from there. So panelists, we'll start off first with Abby Brown. Abby, we're with you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Abby Brown. I'm the leader of Stoke-on-Trent City Council. Obviously, oversee lots of things as a result of that. I'm a member of the board of Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire LEP, and I'm the lead member for the Ceramic Valley Enterprise Zone, which is a project that I've led since 2015. In my private life, I'm also a director of a small property consortium in another county elsewhere that we won't be talking about this morning. Thank you.
Richard, we're with you.
Yes, I'm Richard Mounsey. Good morning to everybody. My business is Mounsey Chartered Surveyors. We specialise in commercial property advice, and we're based on Festival Park in Stoke-on-Trent.
Matt?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Kind. I head up 3 companies. We recently relocated out of Birmingham City Centre into Lichfield, and we're mortgage brokers, commercial finance brokers, and we also recruit for the banking and financial services industry.
Thanks, Matt. Tony?
Hi, Tony Nash from Stoford Developments. We're trader developers based in Birmingham. That is, we don't hold any of the development that we do. And we specialise in industrial and office development, largely pre-let or pre-sold to owner-occupiers. And we're based in Birmingham, but we develop through Staffordshire and all the way down to Exeter, and probably all the way north up to the edges of Scotland, Northumbria, about as far as the country that we cover.
Huge geography, Tony. Thanks.
Yeah.
So going to get the discussion started. So Councillor Brown, how do you feel the needs of businesses have changed over the past 12 months?
Well, I think clearly, it's self-evident, isn't it? There's been a huge change in life, really, generally, as we know it over the last 12 months. My husband works in IT, and he's obviously had the ability to work from home for years and years, but certainly the business that he currently works for, he's worked at home for the last 7 months, and they've dispersed their entire workforce to where they live. But of course, it's put into real focus the way that people work across the whole country, whether it is in high-tech industries such as IT, or generally for myself as the leader of the City Council. Today, we probably have in the region of 30 to 40 people in our main headquarters in the middle of Stoke-on-Trent, and the rest of our staff are all working from home. Been challenges for doing that, and certainly from a public sector point of view, people will say to me that clearly the public sector is often miles behind the private sector, but everybody has had to very quickly adapt, haven't they, to working in a different way. So today, if you ring our call centre, the likelihood is you'll be answered by somebody who's sitting in their own home answering that call, as opposed to in our dedicated call centre somewhere within the city. So I think we haven't just seen a big change, have we, around private business, but also in the public sector. And clearly, again, we are looking as an organisation at how we change our working practices much more quickly to accommodate that, but also as a result of that to free up our own assets. So I think, a big change there, both in the way that people work, but also as property owners. City Council owns a significant portfolio of property, how we then market that as well to businesses moving forward.
Thanks, Abby. And how do you think your workforce feel about that change?
Well, I think they feel delighted about it. I think we ran a survey amongst our staff several weeks ago, and actually, I think in general, people do find it quite conducive to a better work-life balance. But of course, it's horses for courses, isn't it? Some people don't like working at home. I know we have members of staff who've wanted to be in because they find that is better for their mental health, for their work-life balance, and that they actually feel that they work better. But equally, I know that we have lots of members of staff who feel that working from home gives them more flexibility to have a work-life balance, and is also more conducive to what they do. I've got to be honest, I'm a people person, Alan, and I didn't think I would be able to cope with being at home, see my husband every day, frankly. But
stunning
actually,
admission on a webinar, Councillor Brown.
He's not here. He's taking the kids to school, so I'm okay for a minute. But actually, you think you get used to it and you develop ways of working, don't you, around it? But I think what we are seeing is probably a rise in working practices where there's a lot more hot desking because people perhaps want to do 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, or something on that configuration. So you no longer actually need a desk for every person. And for ourselves, a big employer, we employ somewhere in the region of up to 5,000 people and probably 1,000 people within Stoke-on-Trent directly in office-based jobs. We've probably got no more than, I don't know, a couple of hundred who we're expecting to actually come back into the office on a 5-day-a-week basis, and everybody else will be on a couple of days a week.
Thank you. So I'm going to go now to Richard. Have you noticed a shift in office space requirements in your line of work? And this is a slightly melodramatic way of putting it, but is this the death of the office market that some would have us believe?
I think in reverse, no is the answer to the death of the office market. I mean, we're seeing some quite significant office inquiries still in the marketplace. Yes, those inquiries have changed. Their requirements are slightly different than they would have been 12 months ago, say. But there is still a general need for office space, and different sorts of businesses, as Abby's already alluded to, different requirements. What is our new normal as a business will be different to Matthew's, for instance, or to Tony's. So the inquiry levels that we're seeing are impacted. I think there's no two ways about that. I think it's safe to say that it's been an extreme shock, COVID, to the market generally, and everybody has to look at what they're doing. And that will take some time to filter through into the marketplace. So where there is inquiries that people perhaps have at the moment, they're probably considering, is that the right requirement? Do they need quite the amount of space they thought they did, or do they need more space because they can't fit the same amount of people in the same volume of space that they would have once had? So there's an adjustment that's happening at present, which means that some people are sat on their hands a little, waiting to see how that pans out. But I think the general consensus is, when you talk to occupiers in the marketplace, is that they foresee there will be a need for an office moving forward. Some will require more office space because they'll need to be able to social distance more. And I think density in offices is a big question at the moment, about quite whether, once we have a vaccine and we start to return to some form of normal, whether that will mean that densities will start to increase again. But certainly in the short term, densities are not. And I think people's comfort levels of how close they are quite to working colleagues and the like is quite an interesting sort of dynamic, really. But no, in general, I think we will continue to see those inquiries coming through. I think the quality of property will need to improve, and I think people will be driven to better quality space, possibly more flexible in the short term. Looking at where they can flex up or flex down on fairly easy and easy out terms. But there's still, I mean, we're dealing with quite a few very sizable, 10,000 square foot plus office inquiries at the moment, from firms that are local to me, professional firms. In principle, the two that I'm referring to, and in both instances, they are looking to commit to 10-year plus lease terms. So I think it's a generalisation that there probably is a need for more flexibility, and I think certainly where businesses are growing or contracting, that will certainly be the case. But I don't think that's ever been any different. I think the big key here is the changing uncertainty.
So you've answered my question that I was going to had as a supplementary about lease terms, but I just want to ask you to talk a little bit about rent negotiations, because that inevitably changes as a consequence of the pandemic. Are you finding that, or is those rent negotiations still as they were?
Interestingly, I think lease renewals are quite an interesting topic of discussion at the moment. There's not the rent that somebody's paying for the same space as they were in is a bit of a challenge actually for landlords. Actually, when you talk to occupiers who are looking to relocate, who are looking to take space elsewhere, actually the rent per square foot actually is less important almost to the type of accommodation and the size.
Yeah,
I think the natural assumption, and I think it's probably right, we are seeing quite a few occupiers who are looking to reduce the overall footprint, not significantly, but to accommodate a contraction of people working within the office space. And the overall rent generally is going down, but the rent per square foot may not be. But the quality of that environment is significantly better, and often it sort of makes for a happier working life. And I suppose to go on to Abby's point that she made earlier, I think that mix of social office space that helps with team working and health benefits and all the things that we know working as a team does, you can't really replicate that at home. So I think moving forward, there definitely will be that need.
Thanks. Matt, I'm going to turn to you now. You've recently moved out of your city centre offices to Staffordshire, at Lichfield, actually.
Yeah.
What factors were key to that decision, and what impact has that had on your business so far?
I think the main key decision was not knowing what was coming down the tracks initially. I think obviously when lockdown happened, we had to make a call, and we made a swift decision to get out of the city, really. And yes, there's a cost element of saving money in regards to the business, but also public transport, and like we briefly spoke of before, just Birmingham seems to be very strange, and a strange place, and even recently, and going in there. So but the main decision was we looked at our employees, seeing where they were obviously working from home. Some of them were based in Staffordshire, and obviously we looked around for office space and had to make a relatively swift decision to get out of Birmingham after being there for 7 or 8 years. We was in Birmingham 4. So and actually the impact has been positive. Some of our people, we've let them work from home. We've given the option to come into the office now in Lichfield 3 days a week, and give them that flexibility, and actually they've reacted well to it. And we were lucky, actually. It's been a positive impact on our business across the deck, really. So
great, thank you, Matt. Tony, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out, I'm afraid, and that's going to be with a very difficult question, I think, to look to the future. What do you think, looking forward, the pandemic means for the development of new office space, and how should developers and office owners be adapting their workspaces accordingly? A very difficult question, I appreciate that, but I'd be really interested in your take on what you think the future looks like for office development.
Well, I think the first thing is the jury's still out. Clearly, this change that has happened is probably a natural change that would have happened over a period of time. Yes. Technology would have eventually seeped into us dinosaurs, and we would have had to have adapted to working from home. And it's all about, office occupation is all about human resource, because an office is simply a function of obviously the staff that go in it. I might be stating the bleeding obvious. So the nicer the place it is to work for people, and the better it is for people to work in a certain way, that's where it will go. Efficiency is all that I'm afraid employers often look for, and if staff are happy, they're often more productive. So where we've developed buildings for people in the past, I would say the good people we've worked for have really focused on what the staff want, and that all the design around the building, all the features of the building are all designed to make people's experience at the desk better, and when being in the office a better experience. All the features which I think are really commonplace, like breakout areas, games areas, that makes what little leisure time you hope your staff do at work is optimized. And then this whole idea of mixing together, so you create areas where people, all these features have been developing into the office design over the last 15 years probably, or longer. The move to working from home and the technology that facilitates, not the need to commute, that's absolutely immense for most people. So I think these were probably structural changes that would have come. They have come very, very quickly. People have immediately adapted to the marketplace, and we've heard one occupier who prefers it. His staff prefer it. Abby said that her staff prefer it. So on the face of it, it doesn't look great for offices. I'm just going to go really macro, and these are just my opinions, obviously. You've also, office occupier agents just mentioned that, Richard, that, you know, demand is down to some degree, the quantity of space, how long people take leases for. So from an investor's point of view, there's not much great news out there. I hope I'm not a doom and gloom merchant, but we are seeing the value of offices go off as an investment sector. So all of that sort of pulled together is, yes, of course, people still want offices. The more efficient employers can make the place of work, the better it will be. The more attractive you can make the office space, the better it will be. So I think the future for office design and development is quality. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times from various people. So not just the building itself, but the surrounds of the building, the amenity space produced by it. So I think we could really see offices taking up more area and far more space being given over to public realm within an office development. And the quality of that public realm has to be really high, really well managed. It's got to be a great experience going to work. So that's probably the future, and enlightened employers will, if they want a building for them, will look towards those features. So yeah, it's all about quality, really. And I suppose it always was, and was already moving that way. I mean, back in the 80s, we used to be able, not that I would ever do such a thing, but other developers might have built facilities, but really not great quality, not great natural light, not great access to shops and restaurants. But that has really, really changed over the last 20 years. And I think COVID's just accelerated that process. And it's a fairly nasty shock to the office sector, I'm afraid.
So Tony, I'm just going to come in with
a
slightly technical question. You've talked about the sort of ambience of the office space needs to change to make it a great place to work. That changes the relationship between rent and service charge. So do you think that's going to feature in people's discussions about what they're looking for moving forward?
I mean, rent's an interesting thing. Of course, every businessman tries to get his rent as low as possible, but I genuinely believe that it's such a small percentage of the pie chart of a service industry who has an office building. The cost of the building and the rent is insignificant. Having happy staff and not losing staff through turnover, etc., that's the key. So do occupiers actually mind paying 25, 35, 45 pounds a square foot? Not if the staff that it retains achieve that. So yeah, the total package of rental cost, I think that rents may well go up, but in those small areas where you can maintain demand, and it's, quality city centres, and then how do cities maintain their predominance, like Birmingham city centre, London, etc. The places just got to be nicest places to go to work.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so the better you can make the place, and the point you're also trying to make is, it's really difficult to say, well, let's build a beautiful park in the middle of this office development, but actually, if you don't have that beautiful park in the middle of your office development, the offices will never survive in the future of offices, because they've got to be great places. And yeah, who pays for that park? It's a really interesting issue for office development and all city centres. They've just got to become nicer places to be, I suppose. It's very easy to say, but really difficult to solve.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to turn now back to Councillor Brown. Abby, we will see a lot more remote working moving forward, with possible smaller satellite office hubs for businesses to use. Why do you think Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent's the place for this?
Well, of course, anybody and everybody would say that their area is the place that everybody should go to. And of course, goes without saying, as we've heard from various speakers before me, that there's a huge range of opportunities both within the city and the wider county in terms of different developments that are coming forward, and also a really good pipeline of opportunities also. But the difference surely for us is why actually Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And Tony's touched on it really in a way, hasn't he? Very public sector word, placemaking, which means absolutely nothing to anybody who doesn't work in a council. But really, in effect, it's about making it, as Tony says, somewhere that people want to be, not only for the working element, and clearly for me in Stoke-on-Trent, it's about emphasising why I want people to move out of Birmingham. There is nobody there at the moment, but actually footfall in Stoke-on-Trent is back to pre-COVID levels, or certainly it was yesterday. And I think for me that shows the resilience of smaller cities, where actually it is about the quality. It's not necessarily about being big and sprawling. It's about having something that really draws people in and creates that sense of place, which I'd like to say that I think we've done with our Smithfield development in the city centre. And I think actually we have an abundance of that across not just the city, but also the wider county, in terms of some really interesting market towns there that have some really exciting things going on in them. So there's lots of potential. But of course, it is also about the wider quality of life, isn't it, for people who live here and perhaps have commuted elsewhere previously, 90 minutes from Stoke to London, which is all very well and good, isn't it? But if you don't actually want to be doing that, and you want to be working where you live, then there is plenty of opportunity. Costs are much lower as well, and you can benefit from the amazing quality of life. And I think that does go beyond, doesn't it, more than tolerating poor internet the one day a week when you worked from home. Outside of going to your office in Birmingham. For example, in Stoke-on-Trent, we're just finishing a rollout of 140 kilometres of full fibre network, which will make us one of the best connected cities in the UK, actually moving forward. So why wouldn't you want to come and live here in Stoke-on-Trent or in Staffordshire, where there's an ambitious plan to bring 5G to the county? With on top of that, all those other things that you have from the benefit of living here. Cost of living is relatively low. Access to green space, a really diverse complementary county, whether you choose to live in Stoke-on-Trent or elsewhere in Staffordshire, and all those great things to do really that are around you, whatever you want to do, which again for me is the beauty of having a small city surrounded by a diverse county too. I can go from my home here in Stoke-on-Trent, I can be in the city centre and I can enjoy all the benefits of a brilliant, vibrant, independent food and beverage sector. Or I can also, I can see from where I'm sitting here, I can see Staffordshire Moorlands, and I can be 10 minutes down the road, walking in the middle of a field in the middle of nowhere, and I think for me, that's part of the discussion, isn't it? It's moved away, hasn't it, from living to work to working to live, actually. And therefore, I think Stoke-on-Trent has a great offer, along with Staffordshire, around that.
Thank you, Abby. So I want to open this up to the panel now, because there's a real conundrum that I've been tussling with, certainly, and that's about that innovation and collaboration piece. I find this sort of way of working when it comes to innovation and creating new ideas quite difficult, really, because I rely quite heavily on non-verbal communication to see whether or not I've said something that's daft. So if somebody's not on the screen, if I was in an office with somebody, I could see them rolling their eyes as I'm saying something daft. On this platform, I can't see that. So I find the sort of innovation piece quite difficult to come up with sort of new creative stuff. So how do you think people are getting on with that innovation and collaboration thing in this new way of working outside the office, or do you think it's not been affected at all? Matthew, what do you think? How do you think your employees are dealing with that?
I think with the employees, especially face-to-face contact's important, so that and platforms like this are useful, and the amount of Zoom and Teams meetings that have gone on this year it's ridiculous. I'm getting them daily basically, but yeah, I think it's good. I actually it is good, and clients, our clients, we are operating through this technology, and it is useful, but you're right, it is nice to go out and meet people at the same time too, isn't it? So it's not everyone's cup of tea, but yeah, I think it's been advantageous, especially for what we do as well. So
right. Richard, what's your thoughts?
I don't think you can replace face-to-face meetings with Zoom or Teams calls. I think they're a very good replacement, or a very good sort of alternative. Or I, as a people person, particularly a bit like yourself, Alan, I I enjoy the interaction, and I get quite a lot more out of the interaction talking to somebody face to face than I will over a Teams call or a Zoom call. I think there is something to be said though for being available for meetings and I think, you know, client meetings where there's 4 or 5 people coming to the same point of contact that might take 2 or 3 weeks to organise because everybody's diary's busy is a hell of a lot easier when you've all got connectivity via Teams. So for me personally, I don't think we can quite recreate what we have in the office. Those ideas bouncing off each other, and, you know, telephone rings and there's an inquiry comes through and everybody gets quite excited about it and talks about what the things that we've got to offer or what else is available that sort of generates other bits of business for us. We can't replicate that with a Teams call because there isn't really the flexibility in being able to do that. You're not in between a job when somebody just asks you a question, for instance. So it's a little bit more structured, but I mean, you can't deny that it's worked very well generally, and it continues to do so.
Abby, I just want to segue from that into a question about people's mental health. Stoke-on-Trent City Council employ a lot of people in very sort of, I suppose, touchy-feely roles, for want of a better description. How do you, as the leader of a council, make sure that the mental health of the people you're employing, given the new way of working, given the fact you can't see them face to face as frequently as you would have done? How do you keep on top of that?
Well, I think good question, and it's about engagement, isn't it? I think I completely agree actually with everything that Richard said, but I think it's also very easy in the day-to-day course of doing what you need to do. And as you say, Alan, we deliver 700 services that touch the lives of residents of the city every day, whether it's ensuring the street lights are on right the way through to looking after some of the most vulnerable people. It's very easy for our own teams to get caught up, whether we're working from home or working in an office, with actually doing their job as opposed to engaging with each other. So I think there's almost been an element perhaps for us of going back to basics around how do you simply engage. And, you know, as the leader of the council, and, you know, those who know me will know I'm incredibly blunt and I just say exactly what I think. And I just, you know, at times I've had to say to my officers, actually, how do you actually talk to them, don't you? And when you say yes, you have haven't you? You know, we have actually done it in that very, if you were starting from scratch and reinventing this, how would you do it? So I think probably for us in a way, it's been quite healthy to go back and examine how that works in a very granular way, where you start to then build up the practices, as you know, as you've described yourself, Alan, from starting in a business where you employ 2 people. How do you then scale that up to engage with 100? So I think, you know, we continue to build on that. I think the challenge at the moment is, as we move forward, you know, we were in a process of understanding which of our services we needed to start bringing back. We've now had to go right back to the beginning again on that. So I think that is where it becomes very challenging, both for me as the leader of a city, where, you know, we employ a lot of people, but also I have to look after 255,000 other people too who live here, around mental health. And you know, I think it will be a very challenging few weeks for us generally around mental health. But actually, in terms of looking after your workforce, I think there's a huge amount there that, in general, you know, the message I'm giving to residents is look after each other, and actually that's a good message for us as a business too.
Thanks, Abby. I'm going to turn to some of the questions from the delegates because I'm really keen to get some of those questions answered. And Tony, I'm going to go to you with the first one that came up from Russ Taylor. He says that given that businesses have significantly moved to home working, what are property owners doing to repurpose empty commercial property? If you've not actually been involved in any of that yourself, can you foresee how they will repurpose empty commercial property? That's quite a broad question, I have to acknowledge, right from the get-go. So I'll leave that one with you to kick off, if you don't mind.
Yes, I think it's very difficult for people to react this quickly. You know, our entire industry and our entire fabric of our cities is built up over hundreds and hundreds of years of change, and this change is massive and it's happened so quickly. At the moment, everyone's just concerned. Values have gone down. Investors are coalescing over what property stocks are still growing, i.e. industrial and logistics, and as the market starts to worsen, there's ongoing problems. So to find investment in offices at the moment is a big ask. We are looking at a number of new office developments all over the UK, one on the south coast, one in North London, one in Solihull. But finding investors is tough. And so new investors, they are there, but they are still people who have traditional stock and just know that as long as the location is good enough and the quality is good enough, that they know when the recovery comes, which they will expect it to happen. And they're obviously buying at a discount at the moment. So how do you repurpose? Some of the stock will fall off the end, which is what we're talking about now. And that has been going on for a long time. I mean, that's been going on since the government spotted it by giving an automatic conversion to residential for office stocks. Some local authorities try to protect their city cores by saying certain areas can't have automatic change, which was granted. But my concern for the repurposing of an office building, the obvious one is residential, because that's where is the go-to for everything, I suppose, is that, and this is something I don't know the answer to, and I don't know if there are any resi people on, but it's an office conversation. There haven't been any resi agents on, but I'm not sure, and again, I think the jury's still out on how the city centre residential market has been affected by COVID. I mean, that's another part. And if both those sectors are impacted, that's a very, very interesting conversation that we all have to, as planners, as developers, as investors, what is that repurposing? I mean, it's a great question. My answer is the obvious one is residential. But my caveat to everything being converted to residential is who wants to live in a flat during lockdown? If this is a reasonably permanent type, and how much do you need to live in the city centre if your place of work you don't need to be in immediate, you don't need to walk. It's lovely to walk to work. I live in the middle of Birmingham, so I'm sort of 5-10 minutes from my office. But yes, it's a massive question, and the whole purpose of city centres is something that everyone needs to try and get to grips with. What is the answer? I don't know. Is it a really, really difficult question to answer, and something that urban designers and planners have to get hold of? Yes, otherwise we will have very odd city centres going forward. I mean, with it, Matthew said, yeah, Birmingham city centre is weird at the moment. It's actually very nice, and it's a much more pleasant place to be in at the moment, because it seems to be operating in a very relaxed manner. The whole city centre has relaxed. The public spaces feel better. The whole congestion problem with the city centre has eased, but it's not easy for local shops and services, cafes, etc. So yes, very difficult question to answer. Resi, but it's, again, the quality is going to have to be right up there to make it a place you want to be. And controversially, we might knock down some buildings and create nicer parks and public squares, etc., to make city centres really more desirable, and then what's left will go up and up in value.
Thanks, Tony. It was a difficult question, and thanks to Russ for the question. Richard, is there anything you'd just like to say about repurposing of buildings?
Yeah, I mean, as Tony started with, it's quite uncertain still at the moment in terms of how the market will develop out. I mean, my view is that for some of the stock that we've got within North Staffordshire particularly, landlords are already starting to look at how do they offer that out into the marketplace. So traditionally, put a board on it, offer it out as a single building. If it's over 2-3 floors still, that would still be the case. I think there's a move towards considering how do we offer that? Is that the right approach? Is there an approach of offering it on a more flexible basis, floor by floor, or possibly putting a manned reception in there with an occupier, or working with an occupier to give a manned reception to offer more service space on the upper floors? Or so I think there is already a sort of and there always has been actually. There's a sort of move towards looking to which is a more appealing offer, and that may be that you offer that with other services like gyms, like cafes, that sort of the stuff that Tony's referred to in Birmingham that has come to Stoke actually in some developments, Smithfield being a good example, but there is still a need for that within lots of other areas within the North Staffordshire area. So I think that is happening as we speak, and from my experience, many landlords that own property at the moment they're not in a position, or the luxury of a position, where they can sit and wait for that to happen. They're quite entrepreneurial. They're quite willing to grasp the nettle themselves and spend that money, not looking for other investors to come in. So they're directly investing that themselves and taking the chances. And that seems to be yielding some quite good successes actually, in some of the ones we've been involved with.
Great. Abby, I'm going to turn to you with a question from Karen Staley. about fibre broadband and the provision of the infrastructure to allow people to work from home. Could you just talk about how the City Council's facilitating that and the discussions you're having with utilities providers to make sure that people can work from home in an efficient way?
So currently at the moment we are continuing the completion of the 140-kilometre span across the city. It will belong to the City Council, so we are free at the moment of any particular company who provide it. I do know Karen very well. Hello, Karen. I'll come back to you specifically about connectivity for Geens. But in terms of the residential areas, we're working our way across the city at the moment. I know that some of the more, I'm going to say outlying, which is a strange word to use in terms of a compact city like Stoke-on-Trent, but in terms of the more outlying areas, and I live in an outlying area, being right on the very edge of the city, we are encouraging residents to demonstrate their interest to make sure that when the technology goes in, it's worthwhile. But broadly, it will cover pretty much everywhere. It is more if you live like me on the end of a cul-de-sac, really, that sticks out into the green space around the city. But that will mean that we will be able to have high connectivity, obviously across the whole city, enabling both people living at home as well as office locations to be tied up. We're currently this is obviously a Department for Culture, Media and Sport funded project, and we continue to be in discussion about them, with them, in terms of where we take it moving further. I was lobbying the Secretary of State for Education a fortnight ago about wanting to connect up to this, because I think that again would be a UK first and would be a really excellent opportunity for our young people. And I'm also working hard with one of my MPs who I share with Alan from Stoke North, who is very keen on bringing forward the digital agenda. Obviously, Stoke-on-Trent has a large number of digital companies based here, and we see this as being the way forward. But I think, again, it is about that compromise in terms of how you can make it easy for people to work from home whilst also having the opportunity to have a great appeal around office accommodation too.
Great, thank you. Jay Poppleton has asked, how do we prepare young people for the new office environment and working in a virtual team? What sort of skills do they need? Matthew, Tony described us, maybe himself and me, perhaps as dinosaurs who've been catapulted forward 10 years by the pandemic and having to change the way we work. My take is that young people will be quite adaptable when they come into the world of work, and this will be the environment they find. They'll be familiar with it from the start. But do you think that's a reasonable take, or do you think there's, as Jay Poppleton suggests, that they're going to have skills to work in this virtual environment to be as productive as they perhaps would have anticipated previously?
Yeah, I think young people today, obviously, with Instagram, Facebook, the technology there, they are used to using, digital platforms and whatnot. So I actually think they would be pretty well prepared. I think there's still need for, coming into a business, you still need to prepare them for the working life, and also looking after them, not just this, but face to face. Like Richard said, you can't beat face to face, and we still have to, work with new people. But I actually think, because the way young people have access to all these platforms, I think they will be pretty well prepared for things and operating on Teams and Zooms and working in this way. But it's a mixture, really. I think there's a balance. There's got to be a balance, as an employer looking after young people within businesses, and coming into this working life, definitely.
So Jay Poppleton's asked a follow-up, which is that his or her take is that that students haven't necessarily coped well with the mental health challenges of working at home alone. So do you see a role for the employer to make sure that their motivation remains in place in this new way of working and checking up on that? Difficult question, I guess.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, but I think there is the face-to-face contact has to be there, and you have to make sure that they are looked after and they're not just left almost constantly on their own. Employers need to make sure that you are in constant contact, I would have thought, to make sure that they are motivated and engaged with you as a business. One of our own employees, we've obviously relocated to Birmingham to Lichfield, but they have worked from home constantly. They didn't come into the office because he lived at the other side of Birmingham, but we're in constant, we speak 2 or 3 times a day. So, that's important, that there's constant contact between the employer and their employees, definitely.
Great, thank you. Tony, would you like to add anything about the take for young people and how they'll enter the new world of work? You did describe the 2 of us as dinosaurs, so
yes.
Perhaps
it's proved by how difficult I found it to join the meeting this morning. Yes, there are more effort that's required. We see it with, we're not that big a company, we're only 16 of us, but we have had a social call. I know during lockdown we did it every Thursday, and directors and everyone needs to come, and everyone was obliged to at least drink half a bottle of something. It didn't have to be alcoholic, but we tried to do some sort of thing during lockdown. Does that help? Not massively. I have children who are students and at university, and yeah, it's a much less pleasant experience for them. It's less pleasant for everyone, let's face it. But when things change, when lockdown ends, I think this feature of meetings will be more permanent. I think people will meet up less and less, and I think employers will have to design ways of bringing people together. You're going to have some sort of enforced leisure time where everyone has to come together. It's very easy when you have a solid business it's easier to operate now. To form a new business, this all starts with initiative and innovation and change, and I do think that's going to be, a new business is definitely going to suffer as a result of this way of communicating, less social experience. But that's simply a function of COVID and not being able to mix and not being able to have leisure time together as people. So I think, assuming that society eventually copes and the vaccine comes in, etc., and things normalize in terms of public transport and all that, yes, I do think that employers will have to force people to come together. They will have to force innovation times, and again, companies that offer that as a service, so work and leisure will start to blur to keep that communication mixing. Entertaining has always been big in the property sector, so because information's value, and that's been stopped, and people will have to find new ways of ensuring that you get the best information, that you have agents or consultants and staff all working together and sharing information. And yet that's something I think we're just going to have to work much harder at, and have forced time to do it, I would suggest. More time.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Tony. So I'm going to just go back to another question from Russ Taylor, and I'm going to ask this to Councillor Brown. Abby, does or Stoke-on-Trent City Council have any sort of strategy of investing in innovation space for new startups that you're aware of? And I'll turn then to Richard with a follow-up, which is, are you seeing any demand in that area for brand new space for startups? Abby?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Alan. We do, and I think it's probably worth throwing in at this point because it hasn't actually been directly referred to. I know that actually within Stoke-on-Trent we are seeing an increase in the number of SMEs coming forward. We've seen an increase again in the second quarter of this financial year, which demonstrates that entrepreneurialism is alive and kicking, certainly in Stoke-on-Trent, and hopefully that's replicated in Staffordshire too. So, clearly that is the lifeblood in a way of the City Council in providing things, and we have a range of different facilities within our own portfolio, but I'm a big believer in also encouraging the private sector and other providers to come in and fill this space. So we have that isn't necessarily operated by us, but certainly we own the Spode site, where Akava, who are a southeast based cultural and creative charity, they operate a suite of 38 studios within Stoke on the Spode site. We have quite high occupancy on those. There's a range of different sizes there, and the model is basically around a creative village where I know they have a regular, or they did certainly pre-COVID, a regular get-together, very much a community feel, and it's very well operated there. And I know that we've just entered into the phase 2 of that, right the way through to obviously the things that we will deliver as a city council. But of course, you know, we have other people as well providing this service. Staffordshire University are just coming to completion on their £40 million Catalyst development. And I also know there's a number of private sector providers doing similar. So actually, I think there's a whole range of this. And, you know, I know there's a discussion in the chat at the moment about the affordability, not quite in the same range. I set up my own business about 10 years ago, and I was a council tenant, and the value of our property is actually exceptionally good value. But ultimately, it does come down to how entrepreneurial you are. Now, clearly, I'm relatively entrepreneurial, and I negotiated myself a good rate and a good contract too, on the basis that I wanted it to have. But in terms of the value, you know, we have lock-up shop space that is less than £100 a week. You know, £100 a week, which actually I think good value. You can have a market stall in one of our markets across the city from £35 a week. So, but I'm always interested in whether our price point is commercial enough, and I would accept the point that probably our terms aren't commercial enough. But I also think that there's an element here that people who are going into business perhaps do need to have perhaps the mindset that I did, which was how good a deal could I negotiate for myself at the time, both around the price point and also around the terms and conditions that I was prepared to enter into. But again, I mean, you know, I'm happy to take feedback from anyone who's got direct experience, because I've given my own feedback to our estates team around how good I think we are or not.
Thanks, Abby. Richard, any sense in the market about the demand for that sort of space?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a number of serviced office providers in Staffordshire, and actually the demand for them has been really good, been really strong. I mean, there's in the last week somebody took, I think it was something like 15 or 16 desks in a serviced office environment. I think the week before that there was probably about 40 desks, which is not a small requirement at all. Sort of typically 3,500-4,000 square feet of offices as would have been. So I think the flexibility in those locations and those types of space and the ability to take a single desk or a single desk at a time even means that it gives that little bit of security to a business that's growing quite quickly, which often small businesses will do. But also on the flip side, if it isn't working quite as well as they would have liked, they can downsize quite quickly as well. So yeah, I think you know, it's very much of interest, and the inquiries are definitely stronger from that than they once were.
Thanks. Ladies and gentlemen, we've covered a lot of ground this morning, and your input's been absolutely fantastic. We've had some great questions in the chat box. We're not going to get to all of those questions during the course of a webinar. That's never going to be the case. But to those people who are watching in, you can get our contact details if there's any follow-up questions, and I'm sure Tony, Abby, Richard and Matthew will be able to and be delighted to answer those questions. Lauren, I think the details have gone out to delegates, to people who are attending this webinar with contact details, certainly of yourself. So I just want to go briefly around the table just for any concluding comments that our guests have this morning. And then we can close the meeting. So I'm going to go first to Tony. Any sort of concluding observations or remarks, Tony?
I think it's an incredibly interesting time for city centres. And we're probably going to live through a very short period of change, which will probably be structural for the future. So yes, these changes are coming, but they're probably structural. Thanks,
Tony. Matthew, any concluding comments?
No, I just think we've just got to keep going and adapting as businesses and making sure that you know, we keep coping with these strange times. And yeah, I think just support each other really. I think as businesses across the region, we just all need to help out and work to see that we get through it really, and continue on as we are.
Richard?
I'm going to be quite upbeat actually. I think there's quite a few opportunities here. Yes, it's a changing market. Those that are fleet of foot will take some advantage of that, both landlords and tenants. But there is still stuff happening, and there's still inquiries out there in the marketplace. So ever the agent and sort of talking things up. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, things are still moving okay.
And Abby?
I would agree with Richard. We do a lot of business together, so it's probably hardly a surprise that I'm on the same footing around being optimistic. I think we have every reason about Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. And, you know, my favourite phrase at the moment about the city is that we are small but mighty. And I think small and beautiful. And that's not simply because I'm only 5'4". You know, it is definitely the way moving forward, isn't it? You know, in terms of what we're seeing happening around our city centres and our town centres. And, you know, I think that puts us in a great place.
I agree with you as well. I think there's plenty of opportunities. I agree with Richard's views and Tony, which is it's going to be challenging. We are adapting very, very fast indeed. Staffordshire has a great offer as well as Stoke-on-Trent, particularly around the enterprise centres in Cannock. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, Lauren has just reminded me to just give a quick plug to the Make It Stoke and Staff's team. She's put her email address in the chat box. This meeting this morning has been recorded, so you'll be able to access it in the future if you want. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, can I say thank you for joining us?